For most people, their last name is a source of pride, an inheritance passed down through bloodlines and generations. But in the Philippines, that assumption doesn't always hold true. Because for millions of Filipinos today, their last name wasn't inherited at all, it was assigned. Not by their ancestors, not by their parents, but by a colonial government that needed to keep track of people efficiently, uniformly, and without resistance. In 1849, the Spanish crown issued a sweeping decree that would change Filipino identity forever. Thousands of surnames were printed in a book. Entire communities were lined up and handed new last names from a list, sometimes randomly, often by force. Indigenous names were erased, tribal lineage was severed, and a generation of Filipinos lost the link to their ancestors, replaced with names that sounded more European, more Christian, and more controllable. This is not a conspiracy theory. It's a documented policy, and the impact of that single decision still echoes in every Reyes, Santos, and de la Cruz walking the streets today. It's time to confront the truth behind the names. Long before Spain arrived, Filipinos identified themselves not through fixed surnames, but through kinship, clan, and geography. A man might be called Lacandula, meaning ruler of a barangay, or son of a Maya, or from the village of Balayan. These names evolved naturally and fluidly, based on role, reputation, or location. They were not written down. They were lived. Ancestral names connected people to land, lineage, and spiritual roles. Many were descriptive, referring to physical traits, virtues, or heroic deeds. Others honored spirits, gods, or natural elements. There was no concept of a government-issued surname. No surname at all, in the European sense. Identity was organic, part of a living cultural system. But to a colonial government, this fluidity was a problem. As Spanish colonial rule deepened in the 18th and 19th centuries, a major administrative headache emerged. Filipinos didn't use consistent surnames. The same village might have 30 men named Juan. Parish records were chaotic. Taxes went unpaid. Military drafts were uneven. Censuses were meaningless. To colonial authorities and friars, it was a logistical nightmare. How could people be controlled if they couldn't be properly documented? Governor-General Narciso Clavería had a solution. In 1849, he issued El Decreto de Apellidos, a sweeping order to assign surnames to every native Filipino who didn't already have a standardized family name. To implement this, a 141-page document titled Catalogo Alfabetico de Apellidos was printed, filled with tens of thousands of approved surnames. These names weren't based on heritage or bloodline. They were mostly Spanish-sounding, but many had no real meaning at all. They were tools of order, not legacy. Imagine this. A Filipino barangay in 1850. A Spanish priest or town clerk reads from a long alphabetical list. One by one, families are called forward. They are given names they've never heard before: Mendoza, de la Cruz, Lopez. No explanation, no consent, just a record in the book. Many were assigned names that started with the same letter based on geography. A town might receive only surnames beginning with R. Another might get C. Some regions were assigned nature-based names, others religious titles. Whole communities were alphabetized for administrative convenience. The process was cold, efficient, final. Some Filipinos resisted. A few managed to keep their original names or subtly hide them in new forms. But for the majority, their indigenous names were lost. Their identity, written over like ink on old parchment. Today, many Filipinos assume their last name reveals something about their roots. But that assumption can be misleading. Having a surname like Garcia or Santiago doesn't necessarily mean their ancestors were Spanish. In fact, it usually means the opposite. The name was assigned during Clavería's decree, likely without any connection to European lineage. This creates a unique identity distortion. Filipinos may grow up believing in a European connection that may not exist, while their true indigenous ancestry remains unnamed and unspoken. Meanwhile, actual Spanish settlers or mestizos had surnames with traceable genealogies, privileges, and land. But the average Reyes in the barrio shared only the name, not the history or inheritance. In this way, the system blurred identity and embedded colonial ideals of prestige into names stripped of ancestral meaning. The erasure of native naming traditions wasn't just a clerical shift, it was cultural damage. Every assigned surname replaced a name that once meant something: a bloodline, a village, a sacred title. Words like Dairit, Pangilinan, Dumlao, and Magbanua survived in some families, rare echoes of native identity. But thousands of others were lost forever. This naming reform also disrupted oral traditions. An elder couldn't pass on the same name his father had. Lineages became fragmented, storytelling became harder, history became foggy. The deeper consequence was psychological. Generations began to view Spanish names as superior, native names as backward, or worse, forgotten entirely. Identity itself was colonized. Today, millions of Filipinos carry surnames that were never truly theirs. But in recent years, there's been a quiet awakening. More are asking, what was my family name before this? Genealogical research, linguistic studies, and cultural revival movements have started tracing back what was lost. Some families have found pre-1849 records that list ancestral names before the decree. Others are learning about their regional origins and pre-colonial affiliations. Baybayin tattoos, tribal naming customs, and ancestral reclamation are on the rise, not to erase surnames, but to understand them. A last name is still meaningful, but knowing how it was obtained, and why, is a step toward reclaiming a stolen story. A last name might be familiar. It might feel like home, but it didn't come from ancestors. It came from a list. In 1849, a decision made by colonial bureaucrats severed thousands of years of cultural continuity. In one decree, bloodlines were renamed, identities rebranded, and a nation was alphabetized for control. This isn't about shame, it's about awareness. Knowing the truth behind a name doesn't make it less meaningful, it makes it more powerful. Because names don't define ancestry, stories do. And now, that story can be told. If a Spanish surname is carried today, it represents more than just a word. It represents the memory of a nation that survived being renamed, and is still learning how to remember what came before.